All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. My name is Ash. I'm a member of the Firestorm Collective, and I'm really looking forward to hosting tonight's discussion between Cara Hoffman, a founding editor of the Anarchist Review of Books, and Cynthia Cruz, whose work is featured in the spring issue of the magazine, as they come together to talk about class, power, work, autonomy, and the literary imagination. Before we start, for folks not familiar, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a 14-year-old worker-owned cooperative and radical bookstore in so-called Asheville, North Carolina, on the traditional lands of Cherokee people. We're an anarchist collective that is well known for our curated inventory of titles related to feminism, queerness, social movements, and radical politics. We ship books all across the country, and if you haven't checked us out yet, our full catalog is available on our website, which I will drop links to in the chat. Firestorm is also a community event space. Unfortunately, with the ongoing pandemic, we continue to be on hiatus with in-person gatherings and have transitioned our community and author events entirely to an online virtual space. But with that said, we do have a list of exciting virtual events coming up in collaboration with folks like PM Press and other indie publishers. So if you're interested in staying informed about events happening through Firestorm, you can follow us on social media, and I will also drop a link to our community calendar in the chat. A note for those attending in the live audience, there will be time at the end of today's conversation for a Q&A. So if you're interested in asking a question at any point, I'll encourage you to submit them throughout the discussion using the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen if you're attending on Zoom, or in the comments if you are following along on the Facebook live stream. Cool. Now I'll move into introducing tonight's speakers. Cara Hoffman is the author of 3 New York Times notable books. The most recent, Running, was an Esquire Magazine Best Book of the Year and an Autostraddle Best Queer and Feminist Book of the Year. A Macdowell Fellow, she has been nominated for a Folio Prize and has taught as a visiting lecturer at Oxford University. Her collection of short stories, Ruin, which you can find on our website, was just released by PM Press. Cynthia Cruz is the author of 6 collections of poems. Disquieting Essays on Silence was published in 2019, and the Melancholia of Class, a manifesto for the working class, was published by Repeater Books in 2021. Cruz is currently working on a book on the working class, the death drive, and negative freedom, and is pursuing a PhD in philosophy at the European Graduate School. So Cara, Cynthia, thank you so much for being here tonight, and I will pass it over to Cara.
Thank you, Ash, and thank you, Firestorm. It's really fantastic. It's wonderful always to be able to be part of an event for an anarchist info shop. Really, really happy to be able to be back doing things like this, and very excited to be speaking with Cynthia tonight. And I guess, Cynthia, you and I had talked about maybe kicking it off by reading a little bit from our new work. So I think what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit, we'll read, and then we'll talk a little bit about Anarchist Review of Books and Cynthia's piece that appears in Anarchist Review. And then, as Ash said, we'll be able to open it up to questions for people. So without further ado, or Cynthia, is there anything you would like to say?
No. I'm excited to hear you read.
Okay, great. So without further ado, I'm going to read the story History Lesson. And it's a brief piece from Ruin, which is out in April from PM Press, a fantastic anarchist publisher. All right. History lesson. Those last years in the city, when people would pay for a human voice to put them to sleep at night, when people would pay for a human voice to tell them how to breathe, I was dying for a silence that was no longer possible. And not even the ghost of the landscape, the ghost of the neighborhood remained. We were not watching things carefully in those last years. We were keeping our heads down and pretending there was a future. We were amassing the resources we'd need to break the gravitational pull. No one anticipates how fast change happens. By the time the perimeter fences went up, it just looked like more construction. 2. I watched him as he slid a tie around his neck in that room in an empty tenement with electricity running through an extension cord from the building next door, not even knowing it was a sanctuary. There's no one left inside those borders now who could receive this message, a codex buried in the sand for when we're gone, something to refute the false history of helplessness and virtue, the story of how they built seed banks reinforced like bunkers to protect the germ of the world, and how they raised seawalls, grew food under acetylene lamps, made Hajj to see the last of the ice. In Alphabet City, we watched the fires become gardens, but we were never stupid enough to think the place wouldn't burn again. If you'd ever lost anything, you'd have known when it was time to go. 3. That first disease, what an opportunity. No more ancient rituals on the pier, no more disgrace to the family. And those people who took the apartments of the dead had such robust health, their eyes gleaming and souls half there. In time, they'd come to eat flour made from insects, replace their failing hearts with the hearts of pigs. They would huddle in cool towers around their devices, watching aerial footage of vineyards on fire, orange as a forge, forests reduced to charcoal. They said no one could have predicted the disease that followed the disease. 4. Before the fire, the burial, the flood, when we couldn't come out to work on the machines because of the wind, Allen Street was a ditch and the workers camped at the edge of the neighborhood and were paid to demolish their own homes and build towers for people who sold them poisoned milk. There are herds of deer there now, their hooves clicking on the hard concrete. 5. It was once someone's job to supply schools across the country with sealed plastic packets of fetal animals so their private anatomies could be observed by children. The dainty doll version of intestines, the heart the size of a finger joint, blood vessels like ruby-colored fishing line. Someone drove around in a van with all those vacuum-packed cadavers. As an artist, I am versed in the creation and preservation of material things, in the survival of matter, of form. Blood lasts longer on canvas than it does in your veins. 6. In Exarchia, I buy a pair of pony skin shoes and incense from the kiosk and liquor made from the tears of trees and toothpaste made from myrrh and regulation masks against tear gas and against the windstorms blowing in from the Sahara. I buy the tentacles of an animal that was as smart as a child and lived as long as my uncle and eat them in the evening by the locked front gate. The white sprawl of Athens is a sea of terraces, TV antennas, and satellite dishes. There are chunks of mountain and forest, climbing vines and houses built into the cliffside, hollows below street level that shelter Byzantine churches, foxes burrowing in the cedars on Lysibetis, flocks of finches roosting in the eaves of modernist arcades. There is no better place to be lost than a place that has already been lost. 7. Cars smolder at the border of the neighborhood beneath black flags like a warning. Below the barbed wire on the roof of Gare Squat, a banner reads, "We will not end the occupation, we will trample you." Up on Caledromio, it smells like neroli and a burning car, and the man from the shoe repair's got dark-stained hands, which I notice when he locks the gate. When I ask him if he saw the people throwing Molotovs at the police bus last night, he shrugs and says, "The kids have to practice somewhere." 8. We slip past the bitter orange trees and through the narrow street, clang up the metal steps to drink cold mastica from little cups. From above, we can see how lithe their bodies are, how smart they're dressed, bandanas up over their faces. A breeze moves the hedge of jasmine that climbs the building, and blossoms pool in the gutter, already white with ash. They are flipping the car, I say, to practice the language. They have flipped the car, he corrects.
It's amazing. I love that so much.
Thank you.
So I'm going to read the introduction to the Melancholia of Class, and do that now. Hold on a sec. Try to read it from here. So it opens with a quote from the Arcades Project. The first tremors of awakening serve to deepen the sleep. I recently met with a former mentor and professor of mine. I explained this book and its concept to her, the melancholia that ensues when one abandons one's working class background. After I had explained it and how it came about, she told me, reassuringly, that I don't dress or talk like someone from the working class. I was stunned by her comment. What, I wonder, did she imagine someone from the working class might look or talk like? I was shocked, and yet friends and colleagues say things like this to me all the time. I didn't ask my mentor what she imagined the working class look or talk like. I was too shocked to react in any coherent way, but also I already had a pretty good idea. The images my mentor was calling to mind when she imagined me as not looking or talking like someone from the working class are the same ones friends and colleagues call to mind when they too imagine the working class. When, for instance, I was on food stamps, when for much of my adult life, my earnings have situated me comfortably within the US parameters for poverty, what did I look like? I was teaching undergrad and graduate students. I was writing books. In other words, I appeared the way I always appear. Being poor or working class is not a look. The specter of what the middle class imagine as working class is always with me. In a sense, that specter is my double, my working class self, the ghost of who I left behind when I left my hometown, now hidden behind a palimpsest of tropes the middle class invented. Throughout this book, I use the terms middle class, bourgeoisie, and ruling class interchangeably. It is where I come from, who I am, and who I will always be. Of course, even when I've lived in poverty, I've been able to present myself, comb my hair, wear clean, contemporary clothing. And is this not the case for all working class people? When the middle class say I don't look or sound working class, what is really being alluded to is the unsayable, how the working class subject appears in the dreams of the middle class, a monstrosity, unclean, disheveled, haunting. Such tropes are consistent. They've been around for decades and are culturally constructed and reinforced by the media. And yet, of course, such tropes contradict reality. The growing majority of working class people in the United States are women and non-white. Here in New York City, for example, where I live, the majority of construction workers, nannies, taxi drivers, shop clerks, bus drivers, transit workers, and food deliverers are not white. At the public university where I teach, my students are working class and almost entirely non-white. The liberal middle class's continued adherence to this set of old stereotypes serves to erase the working class in two ways. First, by insisting that there is no working class because there are seemingly no white male factory workers anymore, whilst at the same time removing social class from the experience of the non-white working class. Furthermore, these stereotypes set up a false binary between white and non-white workers when in fact all members of the working class share in the same struggle against oppression by the ruling class. With the removal of the term social class from discourse, this elementary fact is erased. And yet it wasn't always this way. As Boris Groys points out, before the 1980s, there was a shift from what he calls horizontal solidarity to vertical solidarity, as he writes. The notion of solidarity is historically connected to the struggle of the exploited classes against the exploiting classes. Thus, in the context of the class struggle, solidarity was always horizontal solidarity. This was a solidarity among the oppressed directed against the oppressors. In the 1980s, parallel with the emergence of neoliberalism, throughout the book, I use neoliberalism and capitalism interchangeably. This new vertical solidarity began to emerge. As Groys writes, thus, it is what we will often read that all American women should manifest their solidarity with Hillary Clinton because she is a woman. All women, regardless of social class, were expected to take on the same desire to, quote, move up the ladder, unquote. These ideologies are never spoken. They don't have to be. All true ideologies are normalized, permeating throughout all aspects of culture. The slow erasure of social class and class difference and insistence on meritocracy has changed our society. At the same time, although social class has been removed from discourse, old culturally constructed stereotypes of the working class continue, keeping the working class in our place. When my mentor told me I didn't look working class, I was rendered speechless. One moment, I was having a conversation with an activist about the state of the world. The next moment, I was shocked back into reality. Amnesia is a constant sea. We swim in it all the time. We need the ballast of memory, as the filmmaker John Aconfer says. I was asleep in the belief that I was just like my mentor, that my mentor imagined me as an equal. I fall asleep, I wake up, I play the charade, I fall asleep again. Then I'm awakened once again when I'm forced to encounter what Lacan calls the real, that which is in excess of what my psyche can handle. Amnesia, forgetfulness, and dissociation are ways the psyche protects itself from the real, from the original trauma. When, for example, the reality of who I am and where I come from is projected back onto me, and I am removed from the role I am in that moment, that moment, college professor, writer, academic, etc. These occurrences happen all the time, and yet each time they occur, I am shocked again. When my mentor said I didn't look or sound working class, she was saying two things. First, she was congratulating me for passing as middle class. Second, she was telling me that as a result of my passing as middle class, I was not like other working class people. You don't look or sound working class is a way of attempting to cleave me away from the rest of the working class. I am the exception. This cleaving away allows the person I'm speaking to a sense of relief. If I'm not really working class, then they are not really talking to someone who is working class. Being working class in the United States is like living in a separate parallel world. I'm sitting in a windowless room of the New York City Department of Social Services among other families, workers, and the poor who, like me, have been asked to arrive by a specific hour and, like me, have been waiting an entire day to be seen. Not because there has been an emergency or misunderstanding, but because this is how the working class experience time in America. We wait, some of us asleep in the stiff plastic chairs. No one appears visibly upset. We are accustomed to this. We know this is the unspoken rule we have to abide by. We trade in our time for services. So I'm here to apply for food stamps. This holds true for trying to receive disability coverage or other social services. We wait for days in waiting rooms, and then once we are summoned to speak with someone, we are told we need to fill out an additional form, go to another office, go home to retrieve another document. The unspoken assumption is that we have no work, that we have nothing better to do. It feels like a form of punishment for being unfit or lazy, for being unable to compete in neoliberal society. How do I write about something so omnipresent, something that informs every aspect of my life and yet for many does not exist? In Jim Kayson's film, The Woman, the Orphan, and the Tiger, one of several voices says, trying to figure out how I can talk about something that is unseen, that most people don't believe, something, the secret itself or the gap in one's speech gives rise to a ghost. In the film, Kayson, in collaboration with Gustin Sondin Kung, investigates how trauma is passed down through generations through haunting. Specifically, the film follows former comfort women, girls and women who were forced into sex slavery for the Imperial Japanese Army, and female adoptees sent as children, mostly to the West. Many of the women in the film find themselves displaced without a home, their histories made mute. The film is constructed of a montage of voices and stories and addresses the return of the repressed through a series of gaps and ruptures. Kayson makes no attempt to speak on behalf of any of the women, and she avoids providing a fixed narrative. Instead, through the fissures and ruptures in the film, the spaces of silence and static, there arises the possibility for a dialectic, places where the viewer might work toward meaning. Kayson's question of how to address something that is unseen, something that most people don't believe in, is relevant here in relation to our discussion of social class. Because working class people have experienced a symbolic death, to attempt to speak about social class is to motion toward a ghost. Ghost-like figures appear throughout this book. Neither dead nor alive, the working class exists between worlds. During the past year, as I wrote and revised this book, I've also been teaching as an adjunct. Last term, I taught 6 courses. This term, I'm teaching 3, and next term, I'm teaching 1. What this means is that I work from term to term with no job security. It also means that most of my time and energy, mental and physical and psychic, is spent preparing for classes, teaching, and reading students' work. And I'm grateful for this work, which is incredibly fulfilling and hard to come by. My discussions with students buoy me, make it all seem worth it. But at the same time, I live semester to semester, never knowing if I'll have work next term. Until this semester, I did not have health insurance, and I haven't had dental insurance for over 20 years. This is the way I live. It is the way I've always lived. And yet I feel guilty because I realize how fortunate I am to have work at all, to be able to teach. I think of other working class writers I've met who, under the constant duress of economic instability and illness, overburdened with work, quit writing, and are submerged beneath the system. In this collection of essays, I explore the lives of working class artists, musicians, writers, and filmmakers. All left their working class origins in order to become someone. Some returned, some did not. Some attempted to assimilate into middle class culture. Some resisted, refusing this form of annihilation. Contradictions abound throughout. This is in part because the working class subject, living in neoliberal society, is inundated with the values and aesthetics of the ruling class. We cannot help but be informed by it. It is everywhere. When the working class subject looks out into the world, she does not see herself reflected back. She sees only the middle class mirrored back onto her. Indeed, this effect is so overpowering, I was not aware I was not middle class until my being working class was interpolated onto me as a child. Furthermore, because neoliberalism insists there are no social classes, there is, according to its ideology, no working class. By default, the working class subject miraculously does not exist. This being the case, the working class subject is a ghost, which is to say alive but not living, a double, a contradiction. In Joanna Hogg's film, The Souvenir, the male protagonist, a working class contemporary dandy called Anthony, who is or is not a diplomat and does or does not travel for business to faraway cities, leads Julie, his lover, his double and class enemy, up a set of stairs in her posh townhouse to a top window where, at the very moment she reaches it, a nearby bomb is detonated. Anthony is not in the apartment. Rather, he has set up a series of paper notes with arrows enigmatically upon the steps leading up to the top floor. How did Anthony know that the bomb would be detonated at that precise moment? What is he trying to tell or show her? Is this a threat, or is it a sign of loyalty that he will protect her from such encroaching danger? Or is it perhaps meant to convey both? It is true that he speaks up for the IRA when he meets Julie's parents in their country mansion, but it is equally true that he is a diplomat, according, of course, to his own telling. He may well be one. He has a photograph of himself in Afghanistan, or a photograph of himself in a place he says is Afghanistan. Freud can help us here. He reminds us that what the psyche cannot handle, the mind represses. In a world where one does not exist, being ignored and at the same time being the subject of daily acts of violence is difficult, if not impossible. The mind, or rather the psyche, represses the reality of what is happening in order to survive. Furthermore, one's psyche may also repress the truth that one is working class in order to survive. The working class artist who trades in her past, her history, family, community, and self for a sleeker, more palatable version of herself, who tries to pass as middle class or upper middle class in Anthony's case, is only doing what culture and society tells her to do. Neoliberalism assures us that we are all born equal, each of us with the same access to material, cultural, and social capital, and that there are no social classes. To insist otherwise is to appear ungrateful, negative, depressing, and often mentally ill. Indeed, to blame one's inability to succeed in neoliberal society is to set oneself outside the all-pervasive neoliberal system. Pointing out the unfairness of the system is, in a sense, a form of giving up and dropping out of the game. The bootstraps trope is just that, a trope, a lie, and yet it's what most people still believe. The splitting of the self speaks to the contradictory nature of this book and its subject. Anthony attempts to pass as another social class because not to do so is to live a life on the margins, to be left outside the walls of what we are told, implicitly at least, is the world. Everywhere we look, magazines, television, movies, fashion, clothing, music, politicians, everything, all of it originates, is made from, and thus reflects the lifestyles and the values of the middle class. Though it's true that there were writers and musicians, TV shows, and characters from the working class, this is largely no longer the case. To resist assimilation is to insist on our working class origins, on carrying with us the lives and histories of our families, communities, histories, and culture. To give up pretending that one is not who one is to render oneself marginalized. It is to refuse neoliberalism, which insists on homogeneity with all of its ideologies of aspiration, optimism, progress, on the idea that power and money ought to reside in the hands of the ruling class. I don't personally care if the middle class has money or material things or power. What I care about is that the working class and the poor lack material goods, jobs that could provide such goods, agency, and mastery over our lives and the lives of those in our communities. These and other contradictions inform the inner worlds of the working class. We end up split, doubled, caught between the world of our origins and the middle class world we now live in. Existing in neither, the working class subject belongs nowhere. Having abandoned her working class origins, coming up against the threshold of the middle class world, which will not allow her access, she is neither working class nor is she middle class. She's a ghost existing between worlds, a haunting. And yet these contradictions and others that occur and multiply throughout this book, in their dialectics form a truth. As Hegel writes, contradiction is the rule of truth, non-contradiction of the false. To write about the working class is to enter into contradiction. It is also to enter into a void, the gap between worlds, the void between deaths. And death haunts the text. The majority of artists I write about suffer from melancholia and or produce work infused with it. Most are dead, faced with no other possible option. The majority use drugs or alcohol to create an alternative exit, a phenomenological space in which to exist. Death and illness haunt these pages as death and illness haunt the lives of the working class. I can't write about what I have lost, the loss that results in the melancholy of class, without locating the object that has been lost. And yet I can't locate it because it is symbolically dead, killed off by neoliberalism. But by writing about this loss, through the examples of artists and writers who experience the melancholy of class, I can begin to locate this lost loved object, this phantom limb, and by doing so, articulate the working class back into being. As Barbara Loden said of the act of making her film Wanda, I made Wanda as a way of confirming my own existence. This work will not diminish the melancholia. Rather, by naming it, I hope to perform an act of communal rite, a calling into being, and through this begin to awaken from the death sleep of amnesia. Right. Oh, you're on mute.
That was beautiful. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for reading that, the whole introduction. Just one of the things that you talk about that I think is so necessary and important to talk about is the idea of the bootstraps story. And I think that this is something that working class writers are expected to continue to recapitulate, this idea that our stories are important and meaningful if we're telling a story that has an arc in which we start out poor and we end up rich and everything, or successful in some way, hard work or luck or whatever it is that proves that the system works. And I think I think it's really sort of a dangerous idea that we still have this fixation on a kind of Horatio Alger story, because first of all, it's essentially capitalist propaganda, right? And second of all, it doesn't take into account any of the things that you're talking about, which is the deep loss that is involved in fitting yourself into the new persona that you would have to have in order to do that. So I had just written in my last editorial for Anarchist Review, that to succeed under capitalism is to fail as a human being. And I think that, you know, we see this particularly in the Bootstraps story, right? And the other thing I think that working class writers are under extreme pressure to produce poverty porn. Right. So if you're writing about how you came from this horrible place and sort of, you know, almost like confessing, right? Confessing all of the awful things that go along with poverty, so that and producing them for a middle class, a bourgeois audience. And so there really is a trap. And one of the things that's really, I think, especially disturbing, why I was so excited about Melancholia of Class and so excited about all of your work, honestly, is because there's so much work produced for middle class people. That's kind of the only, you know, that's the story of publishing right now, right? It's this pandering to the middle class audience. This is who buys books. We have to continually reflect them. We have to continually create relatable characters. And to me, that stuff is unbelievably boring. And I can't believe how boring it is. And I also think that you know, there's plenty of working class writers out there. Their work is just not being bought. The stories that they're telling are not being are not being allowed to come to publication, or not, you know, are not coming to fruition. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, one of the things, I'm just going to hit the ball back at you, because one of the things I was thinking about with your in particular, your new book that's coming out and the stories, and I love them so much, is that there's so many ways that each of the stories has the seems to be in some way presenting this paradox or this dilemma about these characters trying to escape this world, but where capitalism is everywhere, so there's no escape, right? And I really love the use of photographs or frames and film throughout these stories, because they seem to provide another world. And the other thing I was going to say, so I'm not answering your question, I'm just bringing it back to you, is but I'll tell you about a story. Is I was in a writing workshop with a famous fiction writer, and this is years ago, like 15 years ago, and I brought in a story based loosely on my own experience about teenage homeless kids, right? Which exist obviously in this country, right? And I brought it, and I was going to say the professor, the famous writer, said it was dystopian, and that I ought to check out Ballard and some other writers, and I was so shocked that I actually put that away for 15 years, because I felt so ashamed of myself, because it wasn't So one of the things I was thinking about with your works is, so one of the things I finally came around to realizing was that dystopia is all about who's calling what dystopia. So he couldn't imagine that there's actually people living like that in the city, but right. He lives in the city, right? So this is really a class thing and privilege, right? And so one of the things I was thinking about with your stories is that they seem to take place in a similar world, where it could seem like it's a dystopia, but it's really this world. And I love that.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. Exactly. It's not, yes, it's definitely not really science fiction, I guess, even though I guess it's some of it is being categorized as dystopic. Yeah, for sure. Certainly. And I think that's so interesting that you're talking about that, having mentors or having people who are reading work and just not getting what's there. I remember a friend of mine had a mentor who he had written a story in which he used the word rebar. I mean, you work in construction, you know what rebar is, right? And she had told him that nobody knows what rebar is. Nobody does. You just explain that. And you know, I've had similar experiences in my working, you know, my own writing recently, writing about characters who are living in a double wide, right? So to explain what a double wide is, or something like that, or that there's just no. I had an agent tell me that she didn't understand what was going on with these characters, and that she just didn't feel anything for them. Really kind of amazing is I don't feel anything for them. I don't understand. Why are they living like this? Why would somebody take a job as a pesticide handler? Like, I just don't feel anything for them, you know? And I think that's, you know, that's the thing that's what we sort of run up against over and over again to perform and to explain the work, because we're living at a time, and probably, you know, this has been perennial, right? Where there is no empathy, there is no sympathy, there is no understanding for characters who have less, or any understanding for how they got into that situation, right? Like, it's like, because we're in America and because of neoliberalism and because of all these things, it is always your fault. Right. You know, everything, it is always your fault, you know?
Yeah, no, and so it's interesting too, this, because the thing I'm thinking about is this whole negative freedom thing, and the characters in the book that I wrote about. So one could just say, well, what's the point? Because the only way, right, in America to get work published is to go through hoops, right? And some level is to sell some part of yourself, even if it's not in some way, right? And so, because, and also capitalism is everywhere. So it's an interesting thing, and I get really excited. I got really excited when you were talking about your friend's story and this agent, because if we are publishing work we're publishing work regardless of whether or not it reflects middle class, ruling class culture, then that means that it can go out to other people, and that seems really important. I guess I just skipped a middle part there, but that not to leave, right? That it's important that we publish this work, that we get it out there for other people. And then also it's important for me to help other people get their work out there, right? There is this sort of impossible dilemma though, right? Which is that, you know, agents and things like that, right? Or workshops and things like that, it is hard.
Sure, and how has it been for you? I mean, the pressure to commodify yourself, because I think, you know, there's certainly, it's tricky, right? It's tricky writing fiction. We're sort of past the point where people are just excited to talk about the work. They always want to talk about the author, and yeah, and so there's a process by which you commodify yourself, you turn yourself into a product to sell. And I'm just wondering what that process has been like for you.
Right. I'm just reading a little thing in the thing. I mean, I guess I would just say that I've completely resisted it. I've been really, really fortunate because Four-Way Books, who publishes my poetry and is going to be publishing a novella of mine, I mean, they love my work. And so, of course, you know, I should do readings and things like that, but there's not any sort of extra thing that I have to do. I really can just publish this work. And so I'm really grateful for that. And Peter, who, you know, obviously published this, is also, you know, all I have to do is write the work and they get it out there. So I feel like I've been really fortunate. But I think it's also a selecting process, right? Because I understand in the poetry world in the United States, it really, I mean, I'm not a scientist, I don't know what the percentage is, but it is also very much about the persona, right? Mm-hmm. It's about the persona often more than the actual work. And I think if you just don't do that, then it sort of self-selects. I don't know if that makes sense, but then you're not going to be with a publisher that, I mean,
no, absolutely.
Yeah.
For me, I felt a great deal of pressure. I mean, I had a child when I was very young, and was sort of, I was very much bought into the bootstraps idea, actually, and I didn't have a high school education, and I thought, well, I'm really good at writing, and the one thing that I'm going to be able to do is I'm going to be able to write books, and then I'll have this, you know, sort of trajectory, and I'll succeed. And And for the most part, you know, if we take the long view, certainly that happened. You know, I managed to write a book and publish a book that enabled me to leave a really deadening situation pretty much overnight and move to Manhattan and do all these things. But the amount of time that it took really was, you know, my son was born, and I was writing and thinking I will write my way into having a better life for us. But it, of course, I ended up, you know, being on welfare and food stamps and going through all this whole process, you know, and writing the entire time, and then having this stuff work out, and then experience very much the kinds of things that you're talking about in the Melancholia of Class, which is being a part of, you know, being a part of systems that want you, and they want to also erase you at the same time. And it's really interesting. And I also, when I first, you know, I sold my first big book, and I had also, you know, really believed as a reader, as an avid reader, that at last I will be with my people, and I will be having all these conversations, and everybody will have been struggling, and everybody will have got here, and it'll be like this and this. And I met someone who had enormous success, had been a working class writer, had enormous success, and he said to me, "You will never, apart from me, you will never have a conversation with anyone, you know, anyone but a rich person again. Like, as soon as you enter into this process." Yeah, yeah.
No, that's I mean, I should just say, like, ditto, exactly. I mean, I totally thought that too. I mean, the good thing, I think, is that I didn't know anything. So, you know, I don't think I have to say, but growing up, I mean, college was not it's not that it wasn't an option, it wasn't on the horizon. And that's something that's really important for me to sort of articulate over and over, is that it's so often it's not about choices if you don't even know it exists. Right. And so, you know, everything for me has taken me so long because I've had to somehow bump up against stuff and realize, oh, this is an option. So, and I finally was my final year in college, and I was, whatever, 27 or something. It occurred to me I could become a writer because I didn't know better. Right. I read Raymond Carver, and I thought, well, right, he's a working class writer, I can do that. And the same thing, I thought, once I'm a writer, then I'll have like a Raymond Carver life, right, or whatever, Joy Williams or something.
Yeah.
And I think in a way, it's kind of, it's like, I mean, the same thing, right? So I'm not where I was. My life is much different, and I'm grateful for that. But also at a certain point, I realized, and I think that was, you know, much of the book, that, you know, I may be in the periphery of this thing, but I'm never gonna, like, I applied, I think, for 20 years for a full-time teaching job. I have tons of books, I've had all kinds of awards, and teach in, you know, prestigious places, and I'll never get a full-time teaching job in America. I won't. And I finally realized that, and I realized it has nothing to do with my teaching. I mean, my students like me and all that stuff. So it is this kind of
issue. I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it really, I don't think people realize how much, you know, what a massively horrifying labor issue is at work in academia, right? I mean, the majority of people who are teaching in academia now are adjuncts, and it's a process of you know, narrowing, you know, and getting rid of full-time people, because this is, you know, it's an industry.
Right. Yeah, although, I mean, I guess that's like a whole other, because there are full-time, you know, the departments I teach, there are full-time professors. There are also adjuncts, and that's a whole other thing too. But yeah, so it's weird, right?
It is weird. It is a strange thing to even, and I would also say that, you know, you and I spend, you know, I live, I'm not there now, I'm staying at an Airbnb in the town that I grew up in, because I'm here to help my parents out. But normally I'm living in Athens in Greece, and you, I know, are back and forth between Berlin and New York now. And I think it's a common thing to be able to talk about class in Europe. And it's a very uncommon thing to be able to talk about it in the US. And, you know, in the US right now, we're having a needed reckoning around issues of race and around issues of gender. But I don't know that we'll ever have a real reckoning around issues of class. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, no, sorry. My apartment's so small, my phone was just ringing.
Oh.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? It's interesting because the more I study capitalism, you know, the more it's just, so it's, I guess what I was going to say is it's interesting, you know, I don't know, I don't want to go down that road, but I was going to say that's not true. Well, eventually, you know, but I think you're right. I think you're right about that. I mean, I don't think I would have been able to address class if I hadn't spent time in the United Kingdom, where, you know, people talk about it, that, you know, and to hear people articulate it, to hear people say, like, I'm this, and be proud of where they're from, next to somebody who's not that. And they would, you know, just like talking about class in a room of people with different classes, it blew my mind. It was just amazing. But I think this going back and forth is really important. It's for me, I don't think I would survive if I wasn't always this kind of out. But it's tricky. So for example, right, I'm about to go to Germany for 3 months and I have no work lined up, none, you know, and it's just like, you know, that's just what I'm going to do, you know, there's no other option.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing to what people conceive of as having money and what you can do, you know, what's possible and what you can do. And I think there's a kind of, you don't have the freedom to have risk aversion when you don't have money, you know. You have to, I think, and it's partly actually, this gets into, I think, a lot of what you're talking about in the piece that you wrote for Anarchist Review this issue on Marguerite Duras, and also the current book that you're writing on class and the death drive, right? Is that the way that you perceive risk is so different. And I think it's interesting, you know, when I wrote Running, so my novel Running is about kind of homeless kids living in the top floor of, you know, sort of a somewhat abandoned hotel. And, you know, somebody wrote, I think it was Garth Greenwell had written about it, that they were lost souls that didn't want to be found. And I think that it was such a lovely way to say it, that this idea that you know, people in these situations always want to change their circumstances or always want to you know, get out of those situations, when in reality, you know, the desire of those characters, and certainly the desire of me when I was living in certain circumstances, was, you know, not to be as far outside of the dominant culture as I absolutely possibly could, and also to be just, you know, reading and have this freedom to do what I wanted. And I, you know, I think that for me, that brings up, you know, two things that really get me when I think about the way people perceive of working class people and also perceive of working class characters. And one is this idea that people want to be a part of this culture that is an oppressive culture. And the other is that they're not smart. You know, there's always something that goes along with being working class where people condescend to you in a really profound way. I remember working as a receptionist one time, and the office ladies had a book club, and because I was always reading at the reception desk, they thought it would be very nice to ask me to be a part of the book club, and they sent around an email that said, Cara is the receptionist, but she is also very well read. I didn't join the book club because I really didn't like the qualifier. But I just remember, you know, like it wasn't just like join the book club, everybody in the office is in the book club. It was like, this person that takes messages for us, she might be able to be in the book club too, you know. So
yeah, no, that makes me so crazy. I can't address the second part because it makes me too crazy. But I think that the first, the former, this idea Because that's what's so interesting to me about negative freedom is that it's, for me, in my mind, it's when I'm thinking about the working class subject, right? So you either can assimilate, which is annihilation, or you can, die, right? Kill yourself. And there's another option, and that's the other option. And Freud even talks about in Civilization and its Discontents and Beyond the Pleasure Principle, what happens if somebody, can't assimilate to the culture, and sometimes they they withdraw, or they there's a whole list of the things that we might do, but it's about saying, like, I don't want that, but I'm also not going to let you kill me, and I'm not going to kill myself, and it's this other thing. And I part of that, I think, my thinking about it was related though to this idea that people have when they see, so one of the things you see a lot in, you'll hear a lot in the city is, a poor teenage kid on the subway in like $200, $300 sneakers. Why would they spend that much money on sneakers? And it's like, well, why wouldn't they, right? But also, why would somebody who's working class or poor drink themselves to whatever, oblivion, or use drugs or anything? And I think it is related to, so it's either thinking that they're really stupid, or they're just self-destructive, and really that's often not the case, right? And that's something I was thinking about with this book. It's actually, that's why the windows in your book are so, the windows and frames, it's an attempt to get to another place that's not one of the other two options, because those are not options.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, certainly I think in Ruin, it's interesting in Ruin, and you also have a book titled Ruin, and I think one of the things that I'm addressing, and I think you're also addressing, or we're trying to get to, is that a ruin, right, is always a glimpse of the future. It's never simply like a picturesque artifacts. That's not what's going on, right? And I think about this all the time when I'm going to visit Delphi or something like that, where here's the stadium, and here are all the banks, and here's the amphitheater, and here and it's decimated, it's crushed, right? It's gone, it's empty, and every time we see a ruin, we're looking at that that possible future, and there's always a moment, I think, when you're looking at that where you're feeling like good. Here's the destroyed banks, good, they're gone, right? There's all of it, and I really, I feel like there's always been another way, and it's always been whether we're talking about, whether we're talking about the Gnostics, or we're talking about whatever other sects that had different ideas about how things should work, the dominant culture has always found a way to crush people. But I feel like in Ruin, in my book Ruin, and certainly in your work, we're trying to talk about different choices that people can be making, and different ways that we can be escaping this. I like talking about Delphi makes me think, people always think about the Oracle of Delphi, like the Oracle of Delphi was like something so accessible to everybody, and they went there and just heard about, you asked how to, what the future holds. But the Oracle of Delphi was a person who was breathing fumes and having hallucinations, and then those whatever the words that person spoke were interpreted by a priest, and then told to people who paid tons of money, right, like a large fee, to have those things interpreted for them, and they were almost always questions about war, questions about finance. That was what was going on. Delphi was like the seat of power. But above Delphi is this cave, the Corinthian caves, right? And there people worshipped Pan and talked to the muses. And so that was where poor people went to divine the future, to take part in community, or to worship. And that was a very communal situation where they brought offerings, and they threw dice with knuckle bones, and it was a communal situation. And I always am thinking there is a different way. One of the reasons I've been so drawn to anarchism, right, is because there is a different way. This is why I am an anarchist, because the entire time we're inundated with these different ideas about what class is and about how to segregate and separate and indoctrinate, there is a something countercultural to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There's something I wanted to ask you or say too about your collection. Sorry, this is not related to what you just said, but just that one of the things that I think is so powerful about these stories in ruin is the way that you have these, I guess, philosophical ideas, but they're not at the forefront, right? They're in the back. And so some of the things I was thinking about were obviously ideas about wealth, right? So a couple of times you talk about, great grand somebody who had the money, right? And so this idea of how people have wealth, it's not meritocracy, but also this really interesting idea about, so it's complicated, but about poverty and freedom. And so, right, I did not, and my family has not chosen poverty, right? We live in a capitalist culture and we are the workers, right? And if I don't work, I will die. So I haven't chosen it. But there is a weird little space. And I feel like that's what all this is. It's these little spaces that we can't quite see where, it's what you said before, to make just enough money, right? And it's hard because it's, I think it's hard. But there are places in the book where you talk about poverty and freedom, and they're not directly connected, but it's something I thought of. And then also I just wanted to say too about war. And there's a couple of scenes of places that are at war, and it's interesting because it made me think about future. But then I remembered that there are wars that we are currently engaged in the United States all the time, right? And there are wars happening right now and people carrying guns, trying to protect themselves. And so I think that's a really interesting intervention, right? I imagine people reading that book and thinking, oh, it's sci-fi. And then if you think about it for a moment, you realize, no, this is actually happening right now all over the world. It's just not happening in this country. Anyway, those are two of the things I guess this idea of it's almost like nonfiction that's dropped into the back of the fiction, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I do think that a huge part of the book actually is just straight reporting. Like I had a little notebook, and for a while I was just writing down things that were really happening that I'd read in the news, right? And they all sounded completely far-fetched at the time. Now we're eating crickets, or now we have to have seed banks because there's so much species, not species, but sort of like varietal plant extinctions, right? So now we have these, we're preserving the, whatever, the germ of the world. Those ideas of just sort of constantly writing down what is actually happening. There having to be laws passed against killer robots, or trying to pass laws against killer robots, right? That's like stuff that's actually happening because there's killer robots now. Like you say, killer robots, it really sounds like science fiction, but it's not really science fiction, right? We have kamikaze drones that we just gave to Ukraine. And that's the reality, right, that we live in. Is all of that. Yeah, no, it is tricky and interesting stuff. And part of the reason that I think I started the Anarchist Review, or I didn't start, but part of the reason that I am involved in founding the Anarchist Review with with the editorial collective there. It's like a bunch of wonderful writers and artists, is because I wanted there to be something that was deeply accessible on these issues, and to talk about the things that weren't being really talked about in any kind of mainstream reviews, and to be able to have kind of an anti-authoritarian overview things that are going on in literature and in art and in politics. And yeah, and I think in reading, I mean, well, I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit about the piece that you wrote for our, in reading your work, I mean, I told Cynthia I wasn't going to devolve into being an insane fangirl. I would just save it to the before and after. But you know, reading your work and just being so excited about it and asking you to write for ARB, and and especially on the kind of classical literature that I think both you and I are really fascinated by, especially Marguerite Duras, who I think is somebody who doesn't get really enough credit or coverage, or you know, she's not written about, I think, in the way that she needs to be written about. And I was so excited to be able to have this piece on Marguerite Duras and class and the death drive that you'd written. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, so what do I want to say? You know, it's interesting because I feel like Margaret Duras is one of these people who does show up, right? I mean, so she's all, I mean, I'm surprised there's not a canvas bag with her face on it yet in New York, because it's that kind of thing, right? But nobody talks about class, and nobody talks about the prostitution. In fact, I had another conversation with somebody recently, and I told them I'd written this thing and I was, you know, thinking about the prostitution, and they just, it's like, it's not prostitution, right? So I'm not sure what they said, but
which is insane, right? Because everybody, well, not everybody, but so many people have read The Lover, and what do you think is going on there? And I think that's, I mean, yeah, it's actually really disturbing to think that people are saying that that's not prostitution.
Right. No, that's, yeah. That's exactly what it was. It was exactly that. But I mean, when I think of Margaret Duras, I mean, I guess I'm not talking about the piece, but just when I think of her, I think that her entire life was obviously informed by class. You know, you can see it and you hear it. And I don't necessarily, I mean, her politics reflect that, I think, but I mean, in her actual life and in her writing, you know, the sort of the dissolve that's happening throughout of her work, and her own self-dissolve, and the way she talks about this thing we keep talking about, right? Being a part of the literary world or the intellectual world, but being separate from it, right? And that the drinking is a big part of that, right? I think for her, like a lot of the people I wrote about in the Melancholia of Class, the alcohol kept her alive. I mean, when I think about Mark Linkous, for example, in this book, I really think that drinking, it's a terrible thing to say and nobody wants to hear it, but I think it preserved him. If he hadn't had it, I don't think he could have done what he did. And I think, I mean, she talks about it explicitly, that she has to have the alcohol with her or she can't. And I think that's also something that, so I wanted to write this new book I'm working on that people don't want to hear, but she says it explicitly. And that's so, it's just so interesting that writers and artists from working class backgrounds or poor backgrounds can very explicitly state things and then it not be seen or heard. It goes back to what you were saying about the workshop, right?
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, just, you know, I'm very excited about that chapter, and that thank you so much for publishing it. I'm very excited.
No, thrilled and really thrilled to have your work, and hoping to have, you know, a lot more of your work in Anarchist Review of Books. And, you know, as we've talked about, no, it's really thrilling. We have a couple of questions if you are interested in.
Oh yeah, let's do the questions.
Izzy says, what advice can you give to working class people who want to engage with more creative artistic things such as writing, but can't get over the barrier of feeling like it's selfish or a waste of time, as there are always so many other things that need to get done in working class families and households? Would you like to take that?
Yeah, that's really hard, right? I think what I would say is that I think all my answers are not real answers, but you were talking earlier, Cara, about trying to find time to read and I never have time to read because I work all the time, but it's like a nourishment, so I think reading and writing is a kind of, it is like a kind of food, and I also want to say that I don't think that working class writers, we don't have to write about being working class. Like, you can write about anything, for me, it really is just about the act of writing. And so it doesn't have to be published. You don't have to worry about that. And there's not that sort of responsibility. I think a lot of people worry about that. You don't have to do that. So for me, I think just the act of writing, but then I'll also say that we need more working class writers, so.
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, writing is a really, it's an art, and it's a social act. And I think those are two things that are really important to remember. I also think that you shouldn't, there is the need to get things done. There's always the need to, there's a lot to do. There's work to be done, or there's childcare, or any number of things like that. But I would say, don't ignore the need to make the work. If the need is there and the impulse is there, you have to go as hard as you can towards that. And I would say, use every possible resource that you have in order to be able to make that work, because that's the saving stuff. That's the stuff that'll give you what Cynthia said, nourishment. So I would say, I can't just say don't feel guilty, but don't feel guilty. We need to have people who are giving a multiplicity of different perspectives in the literary world right now, and certainly re-rendering your environment, talking about how you're living and what you're seeing and what you're thinking. It's significant, it's important, and also try to get that freedom any way you can, right? Nobody's going to give you freedom, right? I don't know if it was Malcolm X or Merritt Oppenheim, the artist who who made, the artist who created Fur Teacup, who said, no one will give you freedom, you have to take it. And I think that that's something that we really need to, live by and to think about. The other question, knowing that middle class type success is often unattainable, how can we, let's say writers, measure success for ourselves? I would say, I recently quit all social media. And I think that's partly the idea of measuring success by what other people think, or what other people like, or whatever is on trend. I think there's such a push or a pressure to do that. And I think the way to measure it for yourself is like how much pleasure you get out of it. And maybe that seems really simplistic, but I think creating your own community and then doing things that make you actually feel real pleasure. And I certainly feel like that is something that I've been really trying to move toward. I was lucky enough to have some mainstream success and to experience that, and it was for the most part a really hollow feeling. I'm grateful for the things that I had, but it doesn't compare to being able to have created like this community around Anarchist Review, and it doesn't compare to having time and contemplative space, which I see as like real success. I don't know, do you have thoughts, Cynthia, on that?
Yeah, not much, just that so early on in our conversation, I forgot if this was actually part of the conversation, the before conversation, but so much of what I see published in US literary circles, I find it to be very boring, right? Mm-hmm. It's very boring. And it's very flat. it's not, most of the time it doesn't actually take place in a real world. It's shocking to me. So that's just to say that I write to fill that gap, right? I write the work that I wish were out there already. And that's a way, I think, to gauge the success, because I can imagine what I want to do and then have I done it or not. And it doesn't matter. I mean, I think it's really hard to take in fully what we're talking about, right? The literary world, the people who publish and read the books in this country are predominantly the ruling class. So that means that I could write a book that I think is fantastic and amazing and successful for me, and it not be picked up by anyone, right? Absolutely. It does that. And so I think that's really important, this first sort of, what is it that I want? Who do I like reading? And then try to make what I want to make, regardless of how much, if it takes 5 years or 10 years or 15, like this thing. And then that's a success, right? And so it's a whole different kind of measurement, I think, because, the other stuff, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's important to remember is that, all the books that are published in this country are pretty much published by the same oligopoly, right? Like there are just a few, right. Bertelsmann being one that owns all the different presses. There used to be, a dozen or something, and then it got narrower and narrower, and now there's 4. Corporations that own all the media. And so, it's a good, good to ask yourself, maybe, what does it mean to succeed on those terms? And, to me, it seems like there's going to be only certain work is going to be published by those corporations. And so I think it's important to remember that when we're thinking about success. Along the lines of breaking into a creative practice as a member of the working class, how does one from a working class background break into institutional space? Where do you share this work you've worked so hard on? That's what Andrew says. And Cynthia, I think that's a very good question for you, since you have really, really broken into institutional space.
Yeah, I think it's really, it's a great question. That's why I got my thinking lab going on. So I think that I will say that I think workshops in this country and institutions are extremely problematic. For the last number of years, so in workshops that I have been in myself and ones that I've taught, what happens is immediately, as soon as the whatever it is has been passed out, people just attack each other's work. They find what's wrong and begin attacking and actually changing it. There's no moment, right? There's no, and so what I do in my workshops is we actually read it. So we just like, what do you see on the page? So it's actually irrelevant if you like it or relate to it, or you even, whatever. If you see a word you don't know, you would say, I don't know that word. Like, it's on you, right? And so, but workshops are very, the way that they are in this country, they're very difficult. And in art schools, I think it's even worse because it's a whole other thing. So I guess it's just a really good question. I think I'm not sure what to say about that. I mean, I guess my gut is to reach out to writers that you like and maybe, contact them and see if they could work with you, that kind of thing, because like I do workshops privately, separate. And so I lead them that way. Right. And I don't know. It also, I think on the periphery of this conversation is, because I've often thought, because the places I teach, they're predominantly middle class, upper middle class kids, right? And even if I have the workshops that I have, a lot of the students are from the same sort of pools, right? So how do I reach out and get students who are working class, and how do they find us? It's this difficulty because it's already so elite, right? So I've had sort of in my mind this idea of having another kind of workshop. There's a really wonderful, it's called Lumpen, and it's a journal in the United Kingdom, and they have workshops there, only for working class students. So I think that would be a great place. I'm sure that they would work with anybody, regardless of where they're from. Yeah, but there needs to be more places like that for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think part of it is actually creating new institutions. You know, new schools and new publishing houses and new magazines, and you know, and that takes money and it takes time, and it takes people willing to volunteer to create them. But I think yeah, I mean, I'm kind of more like, you know, fuck the institution and maybe try to do something that is outside of it, or try to do something that is not a part of it. You know, I'm trying to think if I have any really actually good advice on breaking into institutions. I don't know. It's so antithetical to how I want to think about these things. I think here's some very mercenary advice. So we've talked a lot about the pressure for working class people to create poverty porn, or to create certain kinds of specific kinds of work. And I'll say that you could, in a mercenary sense, write work like that, break into you know, because you're doing what is demanded by the culture, and then be like, fuck it, I'm out. Once you get there, I think that's possible. I also think that, you know, genre writing is really a whole different ballgame. That if you want to talk about class and you want to talk about all kinds of different issues that just don't get talked about, you know, horror, fantasy, sci-fi, those are places where kind of everything goes. I was just reading, I'm reading Philip K. Dick's Valis again, which is one of my favorite books. It's just such a crazy, amazing book. And like beautiful, experimental, really interesting. And it's all about class. Everybody's broke. Everybody's, you know, everybody's smart. Everybody's broke. Everybody's got like crazy ideas about things. And, you know, I don't think, you know, Philip K. Dick himself was extremely poor. You know, he ate dog food or horse meat for, you know, part of his life. And, you know, he wrote, you know, dozens of books, and he died really young. And before, you know, before Blade Runner, you know, his probably, you know, his most famous book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, Blade Runner came out, you know, he died, I think he was like 53. So, you know, I think Philip K. Dick worked really hard in this genre, and, you know, his work, unfortunately, mostly after his death, really exploded, and it's become this enormous thing. But these genres are really forgiving of, or I don't even know if forgiving is the right word. These genres actually take seriously multiple perspectives on what the world is like, and certainly working class and poor perspectives is a big part of that. Yeah, I'm wondering if we have any other questions. If there's anybody else who has any questions, now would be a time.
Yeah, now's the time. And I also wanted to say, I mean, we both created something. I mean, so you've got the journal that you're working with other people on, which is so important. And then I have this journal that I keep saying I'm going to quit doing because I don't have the time, but Slog, which is online. And when we began it, and we continue, it was really important that it doesn't matter what anyone's bio is, like we just go by it. So I would say the majority of what we publish, literally the majority of what we publish, is by people I don't know anything about them. I don't, you know, they're people who send in work, and it's amazing work. And I don't know if they've written more. I don't, you know, and it's just wonderful because I always wanted to make a place where you don't have to know anybody, right? Yeah. It's not about if you know someone, or, you know, sort of the currency of your name and your persona. So yeah, just to say that, you know, that I'm glad that we're doing that, because it makes a difference. We need more places. And I wish I had the time and the money to start an alternative school. That would be so amazing, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, no, like a free school. I think that's, I mean, these are the exciting things, right? The idea of, I mean, it's basically like, you know, in keeping with DIY, anarchist DIY ideas and aesthetics, right? It'd be great to be able to have a school that's, you know, provides people with a rigorous education, a rigorous, challenging, like inclusive, kind of exciting education that is outside of these institutions and sort of, you know, historically prestigious institutions and things like that. It'd be amazing to see something like that grow. And I think there are places like that. You know, Goddard College is certainly a really exciting, you know, the programs there are really exciting. I mean, the college itself in its current iteration, founded in the 1930s on a pedagogy of anti-fascism. I mean, it's fantastic, right? You know, apply to Goddard College, everybody. I mean, if you want to get outside of, you know, like a mainstream institution, I mean, that's really a great example of an institution that, you know, is an anti-institutional institution, I guess, right? Progressive education. And these things exist. As I was saying about the Cordesian caves, it's like we have to find them, and we have to you know, help each other find them. And you know, that's kind of what I'm hoping to do. Although I feel like I've also in many ways escaped the US, right? And I'm trying to exist outside of it. And also right now I'm living in Exarchia, which is sort of a it's a self-contained neighborhood within Athens that is, you know, historically anarchist neighborhood. And we have to remember that these pockets of resistance and these you know, pockets of creativity and these pockets of places where the imagination has power and takes power, that they do exist, and that if they don't exist where you are, you can make them with your friends, right? You can make autonomous zones, and you can live in them. And I think for me, that's, you know, I feel like that's ultimately been my life's work, is to try to find that and make that and create that. So, you know, if anybody has any other questions about that, you know, feel free to get in touch with me about it. Also, right before we go, if I could just say, plug Anarchist Review. If anybody is interested in subscribing or learning more about it or contributing, you can go to anarchistreviewofbooks.com, and we're also on Instagram. Oh, .org, sorry, anarchistreviewofbooks.org. My partner's yelling .org from the...
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, thanks, Ash, for posting that.
Thank you, that's great. That was fast.
Yeah, my gosh. Thank you both so much for this conversation.
Oh, thank you.
I imagine, you know, it served not only the folks in attendance tonight, but anybody who registered for this event will get a follow-up email with a link to the recording. So feel free to share that far and wide with your networks, because this was a really valuable conversation. I think folks will get a lot out of it, and it's not something that I imagine folks hear a lot about in the publishing world. So thank you so much for sharing your perspectives tonight and bringing your voice to this conversation.
Thank you so much for having us.
Good pleasure. Thank you. And thanks to Firestorm for everything that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so for anyone who's still here, I did drop a link in the chat there to the Anarchist Review of Books, which you can pick up from us. I have been very excited to read copies when we get them in at the bookstore. I only recently discovered it and have really enjoyed what feels like a very engaging and accessible magazine about, you know, books and topics that are relevant to my life, are relevant to the kinds of folks I hang out with and the political culture and organizing that we do. So thanks for putting in that work, and It was really wonderful to have you, and look forward to future collaborations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Ash. Thanks for the kind words.
Absolutely. Have a good night, y'all.
Good night.
Hey everyone,
Bye
thank
now.
you.
Bye. Bye, Cynthia.
Bye-bye.
Bye.